Okay, it looks like we are live. So a really warm welcome to everyone this evening or this afternoon, this morning, wherever you find yourselves. Thank you for joining us for this live adventure. This is a new adventure for us at Mind and Life Europe. As many of you know who've been following our programming this year, 2025 is a year that is devoted to exploring some of the interfaces, some of the affinities, some of the interstices between arts and aesthetics and some of our other more theoretical work based in the enactive tradition in philosophy, in science, and in contemplative traditions. And so this is an experiment of sorts for us. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the perspective from which we're starting this year of exploration, you can take a look at our website. We put together a concept note called Arts and Enaction, Arts and Aesthetics in the Enactive Fold. And the series, which is really the centerpiece of that theme, is this series tonight, which we're starting with installment number 1, which we're calling Arts in Action. And we are so thrilled to be welcoming Professor Alva Noë, who will be the host of this new series of live encounters throughout the coming months. And so this is the first of these live encounters. And without saying too much about the live encounters, because we are going to discover them as they are emerging. And in particular, this evening, I think we're in for many surprises. And so I would ask everyone to buckle up and get ready. I want to first just introduce our host and our guest this evening. So for those who don't know Alva Noë, I'd just like to introduce him, and then our special guest, Fabrice Mazliah. And so Alva Noë is professor and chair of philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, where he is also affiliated at the Center for New Media, the Institute for Cognitive and Brain Sciences, and the program in critical theory. A recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2012 and the Judd Hume Prize in 2018, he is an Einstein Visiting Fellow at the Free University of Berlin until 2026. His books include Action in Perception, Out of Our Heads, Varieties of Presence, Strange Tools, Infinite Baseball, Learning to Look, and The Entanglement, which is his most recent book from 2023, which I would really invite everyone to take a look at. He is currently writing on love, life, perspective, and AI. And our guest this evening, we are really honored to welcome Fabrice Mazliah, who is a Swiss choreographer and performer based in Frankfurt am Main, a former member of the Netherlands Dance Theater and the Forsyth Company from 1997 to 2015. His work merges choreography with artistic research, exploring embodied knowledge and the interplay between bodies, objects, language, and environments. He co-founded Mamaza, Hood, and Work of Act, with works such as Remote Versions, Hue, and Zero shown internationally, including at the Venice Architectural Biennale. Mazliah teaches widely, including at Parts, La Manufacture, and the CUP, and was artist in residence in 2024 at the Künstler Innerhaus Museumsturm and the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics. And so with that, I would like to pass the baton to you, Alva and Fabrice, and give you the floor for this evening of surprises. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Would you like to say anything else to introduce me? Joanna gave a very nice introduction.
Yes, very complete. And as I was so concentrated on our exercise, I kind of, I think I heard most of it, but I'm not sure. But I think it's pretty complete. What about you?
I'd like to say a couple of things about Fabrice Mazliah. I met Fabrice in 2008 in October when he was a collaborator of William Forsythe in the Forsythe Company. I was invited because that was a dance community that was interested in what a philosopher could contribute to a making process that they were beginning, a new piece that concerned perception and being in relationship and exploring perception in non-visual means. They spent a lot of time working in blindfold. I remember that week. And Fabrice was already having a very active independent choreographic practice. And that same visit, I went and saw a piece of yours, Pad. And then I was the kind of guest visitor. I was sort of the professor. I was the expert. And so Fabrice asked me if I would meet with him and one of his colleagues to review the relevance of Merleau-Ponty for his creative process. And because I was so busy, I was very much in demand and I had a busy travel schedule, we had to meet at something like 7 o'clock in the morning in a cafe on a Sunday morning after, as I recall, after a night dancing, not in the art sense, but in the clubbing sense. And we talked about that. So my relationship, I'm saying this to say that my knowledge of Fabrice as an artist and my friendship with Fabrice was from the very beginning tied up to thinking about the connection between making and inquiring, between the creative act of the artist and the creative act of human life. I'm not going to dominate this conversation, but I do want to say one more thing before we proceed. And that is that when I was contacted by Mind and Life Europe and invited to possibly participate in curating some events around art and inaction, or art and aesthetics in the enactive form, I always have this feeling, well, as a philosopher, I'm no expert ever. I'm just a questioner. And I thought, what can I contribute? And I thought what I could maybe contribute was some events with artists, not interviews, but conversations, unscripted collaborations, to see if something might happen that would actually be instructive. And that was the team at Mind and Life Europe loved the idea, and we brainstormed about different ways of doing it, live events. This is a partly live event. Fabrice and I have a live audience in this apartment in Berlin where we're located. And there's also a live streaming audience. But we brainstormed other options, other ways of doing it. I should say we're in a private home. We're not in a venue. And this idea that I felt I wanted to be put on the table for us was, I guess I've already kind of said it. One of the central ideas of this enactivist world that we're part of is that we bring forth, we enact the world as we enact ourselves as part of our life being. I had the thought that's what Fabrice does too, not just because he's a living being, but as an artist, he's working with that, even if he hasn't framed it in those terms. So, and then that's also what I, as a philosopher, am doing. Philosophy is, I think, fundamentally also a creative practice. And to my great pleasure, Fabrice immediately said yes, he'd love to be part of this. And so here we are. No script. He said that he doesn't want to answer questions as an academic might. And I don't want to answer questions as an academic might. We want to be living beings with you today and see what happens.
So what happens?
What happens next? How do we begin?
Mm-hmm.
How do we begin?
How do we begin? This is a good question. How do we begin, or when did it begin? In a creative process, I find there are many beginnings and many endings. There are many phases, and I find that sometimes it begins by wanting to just move, to just use one's body to express something that is not necessarily clear. Sometimes it starts with a very clear idea or a concept or a theme. And then you begin to try to shape what that work could be. And so that's, let's say, a first phase of beginning. Then there's a phase where you expose this to people with whom you want to work with, that you invite in the process, whether they are performers or people that are working for, creating the lights, the sound, or some stage equipment or sets. And so there's the whole rehearsal process which begins then. But then the phase of still, let's say, fantasizing on a much more, let's say, free environment, because you're yourself with yourself at that moment, is ending also. So suddenly you have to kind of give answers to people or justify certain things. Mm-hmm. And that's where that part ends. But you, of course, I personally try to always, and I just said that to students with whom I'm creating a work for in Oslo for their graduation performance next month. And they kept on asking, what are we going to do really? What are we, they know what we're working on, but they want to know what it will be like. Mm. And I said, I don't know. I really don't know. And in that question, there was the assumption that I knew before what I was going to do. And I said, well, sometimes I know there's more things that I know. And I've exposed, or I've shared with you most of the things that I knew, that I'm discovering. So I haven't withhold, which some choreographers do, right? Mm-hmm. They withhold certain aspect of the work in order to allow the performers to find for themselves, or to see if would that happen by itself. That's something we did a lot with William Forsythe. So it's not that he did that in order to trick us, but also in order to see if something that he proposes to us emerged by itself. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so that moment of defining, of justifying, of trying to make sense of why we are here together in that space, creating something which is not yet there, and as it is a work of art, and that means everything and nothing, of course. You could have a very clear idea of what you want to do and how you want to do it, and then you have people just performing that exact thing, but that's not really the way I work. That's not really, maybe not the education I've had. So then that process begins, and then it goes on all the way to the moment where the rehearsals kind of ends and another beginning starts, which is sharing with the audience. And there's a little death, of course, at that moment, because we have to let it go, or we have to, this doesn't just belong to us. So suddenly we have to allow a certain shareability of what we have done. How do we then communicate? Not that this is not always present, of course, and that's maybe a longer questions. Where is the audience? Is the audience already in the beginning, or it appears only at a certain point? And then, of course, the performance happens, and the performance ends, and then it starts again, eventually for a couple of times. And often that's when it begins. You begin to realize all the things that you've maybe missed or you didn't do, or and in our field, I think, then I'll bounce back the question, in our, at least with my my profession, which is live, I can always interact and try to work and adapt or keep things fresh or change or throw everything. I mean, again, I don't know for the ones who are familiar with William Forsythe, but you got pretty close to his work, and I spent 2 decades working with him, collaborating with him. We did change radically performances on the day of the premiere, or even the day after. There was no, for him, there was not really like, oh, that's when it's, now it has to be ready, you know. Like I work also in institutions where you are actually, it's almost forbidden to change anything after premiere because technical crew are not available anymore. You don't have time on stage, they have other productions. So the show that you've decided to do is over. It's done, it runs. And Forsythe had the luxury, of course, in being able to decide, having his own crew, his own space to do whatever he wanted. And we did throw away a whole performance, you know, things that would have been choreographed, even steps, and then suddenly end up with one text or only one person on stage. And that is done again and again. So there's this possibility. There's this beauty of being able to make a change, to continue growing and adapting the work to what we think is essential, or finally we understand, right? Because that always takes time. And how do you relate to that?
It's so interesting that you're saying, to what?
In your writing, for example, or in general, I don't know, how do you relate to that difference?
I wanted to just say that, I mean, you said my profession is life, and then you just described this kind of very courageous act, which you and Forsythe and the company, because of the sort of special security and the privilege of that company, were able to take these risks. I think very few of us feel that we can throw a lot of the stuff in our lives away and start again, you know, but in a way that's exactly what that is, enacting as a possibility. And it's not just, you know, the mad artist saying genius dictates. No, it's finding a way to survive that process. Actually, the choreographer Lisa Nelson once said to me that being on the stage is just trying to survive. You know, you have to get from here to there, and you need to do it in one piece, intact, safe. So not make a very simple point, I'm just really struck by the powerful metaphor of life as performance, or life as the kind of enacting that you do. You asked me about how this relates to my writing practice. By the way, I'd like to just call attention to the fact that there is this idea that, you know, dancers are sort of moving people rather than talking people. But Fabrice is a really good talker. And no, I think that's so important to break that, you know, that the artist, you know, the philosopher is meant to be the wordsmith, and the dancer is meant to be somehow the body person. But the life of the intellect and the life of the body are one. They are entangled. And that's just another way in which I feel that what you do and what I do are so similar. And that's also reflected in my writing. In a way, when you said, so the question I posed was, how do you begin? And then you said, when do you begin? And in a weird way, and this is so complicated, philosophy has no beginning because for many reasons. One reason is that because we're always inside a lineage of question and answer and text and teachers and students and puzzlements, and one is always beginning from where you are in this history. But then also because philosophy's problems are the life problems. So before you speak it, you're uncovering the need to speak it. So by the time you do speak it, it's already has a history. And in fact, a lot of what philosophers do when they write, I think when philosophy is at its best, is philosophers in a way try to uncover questions that people don't even think they have, because in our regular lives we can neglect that. We actually, I'm sort of playing around with a quote in my mind from James Baldwin, which was, art aims to uncover the questions that have been occluded by the answers. And we live in a world of answers. This is a theme in Merleau-Ponty. I see a room full of people. As if I see a room full of people adequately characterizes what I experience now. But we live inside ready-made languages and descriptions. So one of the things that philosophy does, always without true beginning, is offer up the opportunity almost, I don't know if this is quite right, but I want to say it, almost to approach one's life as one would approach a choreographic work and change it, see it anew, reflect on it differently, take a different path. And again, it takes a certain privilege at many, many, many levels to even be able to pose those kinds of questions. Safety, there's no bombs falling. And then when I write, my writing is not, it's not as though I put it on paper in order to make it a fixed out. For me, the text is just simply a moment in a process that continues. You know, it's like, you know, the king is dead, long live the king. It's, this book is done, long live the book, because it's just still working on the same things. And anyway, the book, like I think a choreographic event, is an occasion for the audience or the other, maybe yourselves, to keep making, keep experiencing, making the experience of the work, enacting the work. So here's another question. You felt that your students had some presupposition about what you knew and what was fixed and the way forward. But what about the question of getting it wrong? When do you fail? Have you ever failed? Is there such a thing as failure in the work you do?
I don't think there's anything else than failure.
Oh. Good.
I don't think it's possible to do anything else. First of all, because one is not doing something that is predetermined as we need to arrive to that, right? There's no, I mean, there's certain conventions in dance, of course, but at least in the way I understand dance and let's say in that part of the dance world I'm affiliated to or I'm interested in, is much more, there's no book that tells you what's supposed to be done and how, right? So it only deals with impossibilities, or it deals with questions. And then that's something that we talked about together also, and which is something that I thought was also interesting as a connection to our practices also. And that's again very personal. A lot of it's not inherent to choreographing or making contemporary or conceptual dance work, but I'm never interested in in giving answers, right? Or affirming something. I'm always very interested in dealing with the sensitive matters, with things that are potentially problematic, that could be understood as political, or what is not at the end in the frame of a theater. But it's not about, it's about understanding how one relates with those things and finding that relationship. And that's never something you can achieve. It's always something that keeps on happening. And that's enacting, I believe, also. It's not something that you can decide and you say, okay, we've done it, right? It's only something that you decide to do at that moment, but that's gone. So, and within that moment, it's an infinite amount of moments which are constantly failing to connect and reconnecting or finding the relationship to what you're dealing with, or what you're trying to be in relationship to, whether it's an idea, a question, an object, as I also explained to you. I've worked with objects, with things that have been man-made, for example, in a series of work I did. Now in Oslo, there are also certain specific objects, and my interest is never to perform the objects in its let's say controlled function, but more how do I get performed by the object as much as I perform it. So this kind of interconnectedness, or this interdependence in the action of coming together, of tuning in.
What does that mean, to perform an object?
Well, maybe to be more precise, so when I had worked with objects before in various pieces, and then I got very interested in the idea of making. How do we create things? What are we creators of, and what is created? What has created us in return? And how where do we place ourselves in there? Are we only the makers, or how much have we learned? So this whole process of getting to know things and then being able to do stuff with them, right? This creative process that we have, and that not only humans, I guess, have, but so I focus mostly on manufacturing, on the idea of making things with elements such as clay or wood, or so in that process, of course, there's a tremendous amount of listening and of understanding what the matter is and what it demands and how it works. What can you do with it, right? So it's not something that you can force into shape. So when you understand that, it means that who is doing what? Who is doing the learning? Is the object learning to become a violin, or is it you learning about everything that the wood offers and the different abilities of the wood that then made the violin, right? It's not even you. So it's basically it's a dialogue, it's a collaboration, right? It's never one way or another. So it's redefining also our position with the world around, with things that we have made. And therefore, the moment we have created something, such as a violin, for example, and I think I'll be curious to hear about something about the piano that you mentioned before, because you have a work about the piano, right? The violin, of course, you have to learn how to play a violin. So there's, again, so much things that you have. It's not something that you have already. You've made something and then you'll obey me, right? Who is obeying who? Who is following who at the end? So there's, you could say at the end that there's much more adaptation from our sides to arrive to something that maybe we are imagining, but that are not separated from what the matters, so to say, what the elements have offered at first, right?
I said at the beginning that this was not meant to be an interview as such, but I do want to follow up with an interview kind of question about this, because I'm so interested in what you're describing. So you've just recapitulated a whole fascinating philosophical idea about the way in which the world solicits and affords us opportunities, and that we make things that then have that effect on us, so that we manufacture landscapes that transform us, so that our own history as living beings is generative, and in part through this kind of making activity. I actually wrote a book called Strange Tools, the central thesis of which was that what interests us about art is not that the things artists make is so special, but art calls attention to the fact that making is special for us, because we make things, and in doing so, make ourselves. So I really resonate with what you just said. And I realized that I don't know whether you did so intentionally, but some of the language you used made me think of Heidegger, who thinks about the way earth, natural matter, stone, leather is used up in the equipment that we manufacture out of it, which then in turn is ready to hand in such a way as to choreograph us, you could say. But the question, so I'm now just kind of repeating back to you what you said, at least how I took it. But I'm now interested in this idea of still, how do you bring that onto the stage? Do you actually make things on the stage? Or do you dance for things in a way that explores the way they make you? Or I'm curious just to say a little bit more detail.
I mean, they were for that specific, and it's something that I've used since in work, which are not necessarily dealing with objects, but I use the same principle when I'm working, as we were doing the exercise before, as a form of like, what do you have to offer me? Instead of always come towards an external body, whether it's a human body or an object or the floor or anything around you, is try to acknowledge what is already there for you. You know, what is inviting you. And so one word that you've used, and that's a terminology, that's a term that we used a lot in the work, is affordances. So that means that what is already present and calls for you to do and act with. And so in the performances, there were various the 6 different iteration of the work with 6 different objects. We the principle at the end, and they're all very different, but the principle is that there should be given kind of if we talk about percentage, there should be 60% given to the object in terms of agency and of kind of who is in power or having more effect on the other, and 40% of the performer. So it's almost kind of reversing, you know.
Highlighting.
Yes, and how does one always keep that? So in principle, just to give an example, is always asking, what are you telling me? What are you telling me? So even if you want to do something with something or with someone, instead of going and trying to, okay, I'll do that, I can have a very clear wish and desire to do something with your body right now, which is totally fine. But I have to see, how is that possible? And where do I get the invitation to do it? And eventually allow myself to go like, oh, no, there's something else, you know? So that's my desire is in a way my first step towards you, but it also shouldn't be the one that annihilates you or erases you, but then I see you, and I have to let that go also and see what else is there, or if that is possible for a moment, or take the invitation for something else to happen. And that's pretty much how the performances, even though they are very clear compositions, right? It's happening. There's very clear composition in regard to different functions of the objects as well.
That's beautiful. You reminded me of a quote. The cake says, "Eat me." The person says, "Kiss me." But one of the things that I'm thinking about listening to you is I think there's only one part of the story. Objects, they do govern us. They do control us. And that's also a problem. They sometimes hold us captive. We construct the life of habit around them. And it's very difficult to free ourselves from that. But I think that human being is always also concerned with freeing itself, resisting the ways in which it finds itself organized by habit and condition and objects. And I feel like there's this interesting need to bring out that act of resistance that is required for us to cope with these systems of technologies that so govern us. So you mentioned I'd written something about the piano. The image I had was, I don't know if you've ever tried to learn piano. The piano is this amazing, the piano is an invention. Somebody manufactured the piano. I think there's something like 12,000 pieces of steel and wood and felt inside a piano. And yet for us, it's this almost naturally found thing. And if you try to learn to play, which I can't do, I actually have a limitation in my left hand that makes it very difficult for me to use my left hand on a keyboard. But among other things, it's so demanding of your posture. So it's almost as if this machine is built to demand of us that we, in some sense, conform to it. So we know what a player piano is. A player piano is a mechanized piano. And it's almost as if the piano wants to turn us into player pianos. But we say no. We fight back. And we refuse to be played by the piano. We then, and in fact, we can't. Maybe very exceptional people can. I realize as I'm speaking that there's music experts in the room, so I should be careful what I say. But that there's an interesting thing that where does the art of making music happen? It's when I say no, I won't let this machine dictate what I do. I will break the rules. I will misuse it. I will pound it and bang it and kick it and pluck it and squeeze it so that I can make my own habits and do things differently. So there I'm making a point which is coordinate with your point about freedom. I mean, there's so many ways in which technology and objects hold us captive.
But what about entanglements? Because you could understand captivity also in a positive way, as a form of being connected or entangled with something, right? That means, of course, you can't really go, but the other part also is locked in a certain sense. And eventually entanglement in a deeper level or weaving is some sort of entanglement. Eventually it can also blur what is that and what is the other thing. So I also understand maybe in the context of your presentation and of the work you're doing around love.
Fabrice heard me give a talk yesterday on love, for those of you who don't know what presentation he's referring to.
Exactly. Sorry, yes, there are people also that are not only here. Yes. I also wonder if the love is entanglement, or let's not go even too far to that, but our relationship, because we talked a lot about relationships, you talked about relationships. I constantly talk about relationship in my work and how one relates to, how you get informed by, how do you, I gave a workshop yesterday and I said, I explained at one point that informations are already there. It's not something that you need to find within yourself. It's in the room, and it's just be available to see it, to hear it, to feel it, and then just follow it. So it's not even like what would I do with that? Of course, you can play and you can be skillful, such as a surfer does, or cross biker, I don't know how you call,
Mountain biker.
they can do lots of things, but they won't change the landscape, right? The landscape still dictates if they're jumping now, or the way they're jumping in the air, what happens and how they land. They can land on the sides, they can do whatever they want, but still they have to accept the landing as the condition, the kind of topography or quality of the earth or whatever you're landing on, as that's the first component that you have to be aware of, that will allow you then to play and try something else, but you can never let go of that. So that's entanglement. That's where you are really in connections, in deep relationship with what you're interacting with, and you become it. It's that is you. That landscape, if across, I've never made that analogy before. Maybe I was inspired by your surfing analogy yesterday.
Yes, but so what you're pointing out then is that, and in a way, that's what I meant by the idea of needing to rage against the piano machine, is that we are constituted by habits and structures and technologies and objects. We're made up by them. And we are also limited by them because they make us up. And what I want to offer then is the thought that one of the ways we can say, no, I will be different, is in the art making process. But that makes the art making process, what I want to say to you is that makes the art making process generative, not just in relation to the art world, but in relationship to the being world, to human being. Because what one is doing when one makes art, in a way, is doing it differently. I mean, at the most fundamental level, artists do it differently. Like when you're working with an object on the stage, and when you're creating the object or the experience of the object, you're doing it differently. You're defying habit. You're indulging habit. You're exploring habit. You're letting it be 60% of everything that happens.
But I have a question, because doing it differently sounds like an active choice, like something that you decide to do. And then going back to that relationship, for me, what I've discovered, and I'm just saying that now, it's not that I've overthought about it, but I realize that the differences are often in how you pay attention to the things you're in relationship with, and what are the different kinds of attentions you can have. And attention doesn't mean I will really look that I hear that thing, I will really pay attention until I hear. But the attention, in a sense, I don't know how you would qualify that, but more as a receptacle where you're not empty, because you're never empty, right? But where you're really paying attention. What is there? What is happening? What am I looking at? And trying to not focus on one thing, but kind of allow kind of the general sphere of what you're in relationship with to suddenly have an effect on you, jump at you, right? So not what you were looking for. And that's where I wonder if change happens only then, and not when you go like, I'm going to just put, let's say Duchamp, I'm going to just put that upside down and decide of the whole ready-made concept, which is wonderful. But that's also different, right? It's a different approach. Is that really different? Or is that mostly from our perspective? Where is really change happening? If change and difference could be related in a sense.
It's such a beautiful puzzle, because we achieve the world's presence, we enact it. One way we do that is by paying attention. We spend a lot of time not paying attention. We walk past, we don't notice, we don't care. And there's an idea which I think is still very influential in cognitive science, that we have a high resolution picture of the world in consciousness, just thanks to the optics, like the developing center in our brains produces it. But I'm much more interested in how little we see, and how little we notice. And one thing that can help us see is disrupting habit, which gives us an opportunity to pay attention. And I would say to come into a relationship. But it's not one thing, it's not one moment. That doesn't necessarily mean it's deliberate. This issue about agency is a really fascinating one. But let me push us in a different direction. You mentioned love. Do you love your audiences? Or do you hate your audiences? Or do you fight with your audiences? Or what is an audience an affordance for? Shouldn't you love your audience?
That relates to the beginning,
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Well, I think it's as if you were asking, do you love yourself?
Yeah.
You know, because I find that the audience is an extension to, it's in a way a help or a way of understanding or having a more concrete idea of what you're doing. So suddenly you take a different position. So I consider my audience always as me looking at. And that's what I exercise constantly when I'm looking at a work. I'm trying to not be me, so to say, all the time, which is impossible, of course, So, of course, there is never a doing, I think, at least in my profession, because it is about performing and dancing, there's almost never the idea like, oh, I don't care if anybody sees it, like I can just do it for myself in my home, and that's great. It's always like, how would that be experienced and seen, right? So there's not adoration, but it's like it's a need more than a love. It's like breathing. If love is breathing, then that's the audience is that. Yeah. And I do love my audience. And then I could agree with you again about the discussion, the lecture yesterday, that hate then is definitely a part of it, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating. For example, you cook the most elaborate meal, and you take hours and you find the right ingredients and you do something very complex, and and somebody just, oh, what is this? Like it's like a bit salty, like I don't get, and you just like you want to kill the person. You wanted to give so much to that person, you wanted to give an incredible experience, and that is rejected. So you do hate that person, and but actually, of course, then you have to also accept that that might be the effect, and often that's the case. And that's the question I asked you also today, is that, and I find that is very different when you expose ideas of yours or concepts or the way you have formulated those concepts, and then you expose it to people, and then you get a feedback, you get critiques, which can seem quite harsh at times, or but I understand that this is part of the process. This is how, at least in your field,
Fabrice was a bit shocked at his philosophy colloquium.
it wasn't so nasty, but I find it very challenging, because it's also, you're not done. You're not done. It's in the process, and showing something that is in the process is very fragile, and I would tend to kind of like really go like, that's why I find you have to decide the moment when it is right to expose that. But that's maybe just my own fear, and fragility, because I think it's very important to be able to get a critique or find but that seems to be something that is accepted or kind of, in your profession.
Everybody in the kind of creative work that I do has a different relationship to that. Things will have a different threshold for when it's okay to show. But what I think everybody would agree about is that critical resistance is a source of value, because what one wants is for the work to be engaged. I actually think of my own philosophical writing as less defending a position than creating score-like instruments whereby people can think or play through certain ideas and problems. And so there is no, it's not about being right or wrong, but it can't be too comfortable. It can't be this is actually very difficult to describe perfectly, but it has to be about somehow, I think, instigating or facilitating or curating opportunities to encounter resistance. And that, I think, is what you were describing as well. You don't want audiences to simply smile and take pleasure because they know that's when people, when some people at Christmas time, they go to see the Nutcracker Suite, they have a certain expectation. They want a good delivered, something that they already know. But what I think you make are things that people don't already know. And therefore you make things that can be uncomfortable because we don't have habits that lets us see them. There isn't just read it and that's done. No, the work becomes an opportunity, fill in the blank, an opportunity to pay attention, an opportunity to notice, an opportunity to question, that's a word you used. It becomes an opportunity to enact oneself and the work in real time. But I still come back to this idea of giving, what do you give the audience? Maybe I didn't say that before. I said, do you love the audience? But what do you give the audience? Because if you really do expect them to come, you just got to give somebody a meal, but it's not quite like a meal because you want them to think that it could be valuable even if they don't like the way it tastes. Like, this is work. You're doing something. You're affording an opportunity to them. And if they don't take it, if they can't take it, well, this is a big topic.
It's a big topic, I think, and it's part of making the work and having the audience, even if it's imaginary, right from the beginning, because you're not making it for a wall, or you're not making, so you're always in that negotiation. How is that seen? How is that work? Because that's the work we're doing, right? It's not, it has a specific, and it would be interesting. And I believe, and I've contemplated a few times on performing for other things, for other elements, or performing for the dead, or because there's some parts of the work that are dealing with the absence of people, or our relationship to the absence of people. So then you go like, what if we perform really to those that are not here, literally perform and give that space, so not having real people in space. So you how would that be different, or perform for objects really?
And that comes back to something that came up in the discussion yesterday about love. There's a way in which love is always motivated by a desire towards something that you don't completely or fully or adequately have. So the love is always an engagement with something whose presence takes the form of absence. And so love is an organizing element.
But so what do I give an audience? That's the question.
And I asked you whether you loved them.
Yes. And so I'd like to give them something precious. I want to give them something very precious to me, and I want to give them the ability to do what they want with it. I want to force them to decide, or to have to know how to handle it. And so there's this aspect of deciphering, or the question of the riddle. How do I read that? What is it? So I rather give a gift, like, you receive those boxes where you don't know where to open. You take a moment, and that's your present. It's like the present is to find out what is the point of the corner that you could remove, and then that opens, and there's nothing in it. But the beauty of having managed to open it, and maybe it's not even so practical, have to open to something, but it's at least in the way I like to offer work, is offer the possibility to wonder.
But it occurs to me that that's not, I think you're being a little bit
Too safe.
Yeah, I don't believe you actually. I think you do want something more from the audience than just letting them make what they
I mean, I
want.
want them to love me.
You want them to
back.
exactly. So it comes
Of
back to-
course.
you want them to love you. You want them to do the work.
But this is on the way. This in the way. This is kind of inhibiting me from doing really what I want. So there's always a debate. I want you to love me, but actually what I really want them to love me for is having given them an experience they've never had before.
Right. Which they will necessarily find uncomfortable.
Possibly, because that's what I really
Yes.
appreciate.
Now you're speaking truth. Now you're speaking
You know,
truth.
that's what I find
Right.
interesting
Right.
and yeah, life-changing in a way.
Right. And that's where it's about life-changing. So these themes that are on the table, life-changing, life-making, you're not alone, you're always dealing with others, like it or not. You know, we are not solipsistic entities. We are totally wrapped up with each other. The thing you make only has significance in the consciousness of another, including maybe yourself, or maybe you are the other. But it is a thing for someone. It is not a thing in itself. It is a communicative act. I think we talked about that earlier today. It's in a communicative space. And so we have love, we have resistance, we have making. And I guess one concept I wanted us to name, because I think it also beautifully dovetails with the concerns of the Mind and Life project, is this word creativity. What the heck does that mean in this context? Because we're just recycling stuff. We're just working through problems. We're just trying to uncover questions we already have. We're just dealing. Where is the? I'm sorry, I'm saying this to be rhetorical, because in a way we've already also answered the question. How is it? Actually, I don't really have a known question. I just want to put the word creativity into the room.
Yeah.
Okay, so we put the word creativity into the room.
It's in the room.
Good.
It's taking a lot of space.
Do you want to put anything else in?
I want to put empathy. Empathy, just to maybe give a little reason why, is a word that I started using more and more in either teaching or in the rehearsals in the creation process. Empathy as a way of how one has the ability to feel what someone else is feeling, or understands for a moment what might be happening. And when I talk about empathy, usually it's not a mental empathy, because I felt it, but I always use empathy as how can one understand empathy physically, purely physically. And when I say that again, maybe that also relates to the question, to what we were talking about before, about how one knows something and perceives some things, and like with the piano, or where is change? And I think it's probably very different, that we do tend to change or to prioritize other ways of seeing. Literally, how can one see with our senses, with our skin? How can one hear with the sole of our feet? Or, you know, even that might be impossible, but we relocate some ability to you know, it's still a very specific quality. So it offers and it opens the question, how can I then receive the world somehow differently in other places? And so, like, this empathic idea is mostly, how does my body know already, recognize sense before I can make up that something is happening. So, and I don't know what that means. It's more a question. It sounds maybe a little bit spiritual or esoteric, but I don't think that's how I see it. But there's, and I mentioned that a lot in the workshop yesterday also, saying trust your body. Your body has understood already. It knows. You know, we're doing this exercise of listening to certain direction, and it was not something coming from somewhere else. There was a clear directive, you know, and you could see the body following, but not the rest, not the mind. The mind would refuse. So in that sense, how can we, of course, there's act of touch, of contact, but if is contact really not present when we are in a distance? Isn't there something that connects us anyway? And are there ways for us to still follow? So yeah, I frame that in as empathy, as our empathic ability to relate to each other. And creativity is maybe part of that.
Being in relationship.
Yes.
Being in relationship. Touch is a sort of extreme version, but right, we can be in relationship at a distance. We can be in relationship with the dead. We're almost out of time.
Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you before we stop is there anything I can give you? Is there anything that would help this experience be complete for you?
This is already a lot.
It's a lot.
Can I give you more?
I don't feel I've gotten what I need, but I don't.
That's good.
That's not I don't mean that as a criticism. I feel a little bit like we've just touched the surface, just begun the conversation.
Yes.
But I do think you beautifully helped, I feel, support the thesis that motivated me to want to do this conversation with you, that there's a deep, profound internal connection between problems of enaction and problems of life in art as you live your life, as you inhabit. So I think at this stage, we're going to shift modalities now. And we'd like, I don't like the phrase question answer, because that suggests that you have the questions and we have the answers. Let's just say discussion can begin now. And there's 2, 4, 6, 9, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people in the room. And I thought maybe we'd begin if anybody in the room would like to say something or make a comment. I believe that the microphone that we're using will pick up your voices for the larger live streamed universe that's with us. But then also, I forget exactly how we said we would do this. Oh, I know. Joanna will maybe after we take a question from the room, Joanna will read us a question from the cybersphere or from the Mind and Life Europe community.
So the idea is we start with the room, right?
Let's start with the room. If the room wants to contribute. Yeah, the room can say no. Or maybe the room needs time to catch up and realize that. So there's things I said, there's things Fabrice said. There's also this thing we were trying to do of just trying to see where this conversation would go. To me, that's an interesting object of potential questioning as well. Yes, Scott. Oh, sorry, am I allowed to say your name on the agenda?
You already have. So towards the end, bringing up the idea of empathy, I was relating that back to the way you were sort of talking about the bike, the resistance of the earth and materials, and also how you described how you make objects. You said something like, is it me making the object, or is the object in some sense is the object in some sense making me as I'm encountering it? And then Alva with your example of the piano as this kind of thing that we have to form to, but we resist in some way. I'm curious with the idea of empathy as a kind of, in relation to creativity, empathy as a kind of letting the object of whatever the matter is, whether it's in philosophy, a concept, or whatever you're dealing with, letting that speak. Like it's so when it comes to an example of like biking or surfing, like, or the piano, there's this thing in front of you. But when it comes to philosophy, or even with art, when you're dealing with an experience that you haven't had before, something like this, there's something immaterial, intangible. So how do you, what's going on there when it comes to letting that sort of speak, or in some sense that do the work?
Before we answer, could the internet hear Scott? Yes, good. Okay, so we don't need to repeat the question. Good. I'd like to answer that. And then, but then you.
Yes.
I like your introducing understanding, because in a way, empathy is sort of one picture of how we might understand the connection we have, or the understanding we have, or the intelligibility in things. We often have the experience of not needing to perform an active inference to know what someone wants or thinks or feels. Similarly, we don't need to perform an active inference to figure out how to open the door, because we know the door knows how to speak to us, and we know how to hear the door's language. Until we don't, until we discover a strange piece of design that might give us pause, or until we meet somebody who is different from us in ways that we've been led not to know what to do with, we might then refuse to let them speak to us. Or we might not know how to let them speak to us. I think both things happen. Politically, we might reject the other for being different. But what's really interesting, I think, about art objects and philosophical objects is that they're built to defy that kind of unproblematic understanding. We make them on purpose to be difficult, because in their being difficult, they give us, that's a gift. Mm-hmm. That's a gift. I'm going to give you an opportunity to cope with something, mm-hmm. to actually use whatever resources are in the room with you, whatever resources are at your disposal, mm-hmm. to make something of it. Which reminds me of a comment that Jonathan Burroughs makes in his choreographer's handbook, where he says that one of the things a performer does, or a choreographer does, is seed information in the performance that does give the audience resources to get something out of it. Mm-hmm. So it's not so hard that it defies penetration. It's got to be some.
That's the sugar.
That's the sugar, but it's also the education. Mm-hmm. It's like, you don't know my language yet, but I will, over the course of this 45 minutes, if only you don't walk out, I will teach you how to understand me. I will teach you how to use me. I will teach you how to take pleasure in me. Mm-hmm.
It's a right balance of allowing what you're doing to be accessible and understood. Mm-hmm. And that's different with everyone. People really like it to be very, very difficult and almost impossible. And that those works often might either disappear or take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And we've seen that again and again. It's suddenly like, that is so clear right now. And that's also beautiful, because it defies the idea of like temporality. When is something happening? And really, but maybe also the question of something immaterial you mentioned, right? That is not, could you define what you mean by immaterial in that sense? Maybe regarding to what I do? More information, you mean, or?
Well, I mean, so it's less like when you're making work, or Alva, when you're making philosophy, you're coming up against something that you don't have directly before you in experience, and you're trying to get it or get at it in a way such that it becomes experienceable. And and why I related this to empathy is because it seems like you have to, in some ways, let whatever that is, sort of insist on being whatever it is. So whether you're dealing with the concept of love, you're not trying to say what love is. You're trying to let it be what it is, and then channel that in some way. So when it comes to choreography, there's what I mean by immaterial is that it's not yet material, or not yet something for experience, but you're still trying to let it, like you have to let it be, but you also have to resist in some way. So that it's the question of the letting it be that I'm curious about.
And maybe also the interferences that there is in the act of understanding, of trying to understand it. So maybe, and that goes back to the idea of failing, of failure, is that maybe most of the thing that you are at the end dealing with is interferences or things that are on the way that inhibits you from really doing that. And that also informs you and has, of course, a tremendous amount of effect on what you're doing. So, but that doesn't mean it's not part. Interference is still part of, if you think of a landscape, it's still part of wherever you go, you're trying to arrive to.
One other just quick observation about what you said that is interesting to me. Well, two points. One is that something that choreographers bemoan is that there is no object, partly because there's nothing for them to sell. And we live in a world where objects can have price tags in a way that everyone sees. So choreographers tend to be the least well paid of art world people. That's one thought. And then the other thought is this past semester at Berkeley, I was part of a humanities center reading group where I was the only philosopher, the only straight philosopher in the room. Straight in the sense that I was the only one who was a pure professor of philosophy in the room. There were some other people that did philosophy, but they were not on philosophy. They were not studying philosophy or teaching. And one of the things that they couldn't understand about my work, it came up more than once, was that I had no objects. Because historians work from historical archives, and literary theorists work from books, and art historians work from material culture and art history. What does a philosopher work from? Now you make an evening, you make a performance. I guess we make books, which is to say we make a kind of performance, but we don't work from objects, which is a really interesting difference. Why don't we go now to somebody from the community?
Yes, thank you. We already have 3 wonderful comments. Actually, we have 3 excellent questions, but I want to just start out by reading a comment from Barbara Bogotin, who's here joining us, who is a cellist, and she's been a wonderful guest at some of our previous events at Mind in Life Europe. And I'll just read this out before moving on to the question. If you want to respond to the comment, of course, feel free. She says, the exercise you were doing with your hands before we began reminds me of a practice I do with my cello students. Each of us holding one end of the bow relates to your comment about a violin. What does the wood tell me? An example of leading, following, and surrender. The bow becomes an extension of the arm.
That's beautiful. The thing that you couldn't tell when we were doing that exercise is that Fabrice was telling me what to do. He was just using his hands to do it. And I found, by the way, that even when I was leading, you were leading.
So we failed.
No, maybe it was instructive. But why don't we go to a question?
Sure. Actually, I was thinking it'd be nice to hear the voices because I'm revising my own original guidelines. I'm wondering if Laura, you had the first question, which is a really beautiful and beautifully complex question. Would you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, hello, hello. Thank you
Hello.
very much for this evening. I don't know, Joanna, would you like that I read it or that I said it aloud? Maybe it's quicker if I read it.
You read
Yeah, because if not, I can keep talking too much. Sorry about that. So, well, what you said about philosophy having no beginning and the uncovering of questions remind me of the famous Plato's line about wonder, wondering, samazing, as the pathos at the beginning of philosophy. So, what is the affective tone in your experience, reading your personal experience of this no beginning of philosophy? Where is it felt? By whom? And how does it relate to failure, or maybe following Heidegger's understanding of it to the wondrous? Or is it more related to what emerged later on in the conversation about love? Also, self-love and the uncomfortable. I'm asking all of this because I was really like navigating with you in this conversation. I saw like that there is a flow, that there were these different meaning coming out, but there was like a connection, a line. And it seems to me that this has to do with this no beginning and the affective dimension of it. That's why I'm asking about that and how questions and no beginnings relate to each other in our personal experience. That's why I'm asking that.
Mm. Thank you, Laura. And I think I think I've read your writing. So if you are who I think you are, judging by your name, so thank you. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to meet you. Great question, no answers. Good feeling, no answers. Must think more, opportunity, excitement, puzzlement, remake myself in the process. Oh no, I might fail. And no, seriously, like I'm trying to say, yeah. Like one of the things I love in philosophy is how you're just trying to find the permission to have the question, or not, it's like related to this idea about not feeling stupid, or not feeling like you're allowed. There's people in the room nodding their heads, but that if you really take that idea seriously, that I know nothing, and that all I can accomplish is, I mean, really take that seriously. We're just asking questions and trying not to be made anxious by it, but we are anxious by things we don't know. A philosopher who's really important to me is Wittgenstein. And he often thought that the kind of puzzlement that philosophy begins from is actually kind of an anxiety or a disorientation. And so that the work that the philosopher is trying to do is the work of getting oriented, figuring out where one is. One is lost and one wants to be found. Very existential. And I think there's definitely something to that as well. I don't know if that's something I'm sort of speaking to where your question is coming from, Fabrice.
No, yeah, no, I'll leave it to you.
But thank you. So now we'll go to the room again. Is that okay? Or
You have a question?
yeah, welcome
Yep.
back. Yeah.
Let's do
Is
that.
there? Yes, Ariana.
Just a short comment to the piano, because if you open the piano and if you open the pedal and shout or sing into the chamber of the piano, you will get everything back.
Mm.
So it's no need, you don't need your fingers to get a very powerful embodied resonance by the piano. And knowing this, that the sound is never over after touching, and your awareness of all those magic infinity of sounds is shared with the audience. So I think the music is made together.
Yeah, that's a beautiful comment, and that resonates with the way Fabrice described his making activity, and also that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this also reflects a little bit on the question of how much do we pay attention only to what we are, what is the effect of what we're doing on things, and not so much of that other, that response, or
Right.
is there already something else happening, right?
Right. But because I mean, implicitly, this is not your rhetoric, but implicitly what you did was you told us, don't feel you need to be controlled by the machine. Use it differently. Let the machine realize that the boundaries are not what your piano teacher taught you that they were. Open the instrument up, release the pedals, and realize that there's music that can happen, or there's an opportunity for music discovery.
And that's creativity.
And that's creativity, and it's resistance.
And love.
And it's love.
Done. Bye.
Okay, back to the cybersphere.
Sure. Okay, we've got another great question from Hong Yu Chen. I know you're in the room, but I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourself. And if you're not, I can read out your question. Oh, there we go. I see
Yeah.
you. Go for it.
So thank you for this dialogue. So I want to talk a little bit more about this transformative aspect of art. And I want to ask a little bit or discuss about this kind of directedness or normative aspect of transformation that you might get from engagement with art. So one example would be, I guess, similar to religious practices where engagement with the rituals and the practices orient you to a life that gets you closer to some end, right? You're closer to reality, or closer to a moral goodness or the truth. Do you think there's a similar aspect to that, to engagement with art? Or is this more similar to sort of continuous engagement with the reality that's before you, right? That something pops up in your visual field and you transform, and you're called, your attention is called to adapt to it, to engage with it. And similar to how you have to continuously alter your niche, your surrounding. But then I guess in the latter sense, there isn't something that you're oriented above and beyond the life form that you are embodied. So I hope that made sense.
I think that first of all, it's a beautiful question. Thank you. I think I have a particular way of thinking about this, which doesn't encompass all the different things one might say, so I don't want to be too dogmatic sounding, but I'm very interested in the way in which the art object resists being seen, in the way, because it is novel, because it is not pre-labeled, because it is not a product, but because it is something we know not yet what. Something has to happen for you to enter into a relationship with it. And I think that what has to happen is that you need to change yourself. You need to become different. You need to expand those habits, alter those habits, resist those impulses that make you think you know what you're looking at. Like, oh, it's just a painting. Oh, I know what it is. It's a painting. Yes, but look again. Look into the painting. What do you see? There is no, to use an expression that Fabrice used earlier, there is no book that tells you when you've got that right. So I think that the productivity of the art encounter does not consist in discovering some truth beyond, but rather in transforming oneself, and in transforming one's own subjectivity, in effect, transforming one's world, what is there for one, in this case, the artwork. But this is not a phenomenon which is confined to art. Aesthetic transformation is life. We're doing it all the time when you deal with that person whose appearance flusters you, and you need to either make the decision, I'll look away, or I'll look again. And if I look again and enter into a relationship with a person, and I see them, I've changed the world a little bit, maybe a little bit. I've changed by changing myself. So that's the way I'd answer that.
I agree.
Thank you, Hongyu.
Thank you, Hongyu.
Yeah.
So do you have another question from your side, maybe?
Do we have anybody in the room feels called upon to speak?
Because we also have more questions in our chat, if ever. There's
Actually,
Oh yes.
Oh.
We have one comment. Jochen's going to speak, and then we'll go. Do we have time to? Oh, we're at the very well. Let's speak, and then we'll see if we can get in. Well, actually, this will get turned off when it's turned off, I guess. But Jochen.
Yeah, I'm going to speak anyway. I'd like to throw you the notion of object because I get the feeling that it's somehow in between both your practices, right? You're thinking you have this beautiful series of performers engaging with objects, but then I always got the feeling while watching that there's some kind of double push and pull, right? The performers are guided by the objects, and that's like as you were talking about the violin guiding it's being played, right? But then I felt this kind of opposite pull towards disassembling, right? Or taking the objects apart, like a curious kid is interested in something, and then it feels a pull, then he or she feels a pull to take it apart.
Mm.
And that, like, giving themselves over to the danger that it's gone. Right. And there's something about love, and I mean it's no coincidence that Freud's name for the person you love is the object of your love, right? So there's objectivation there, and maybe there's, in thinking about love, the same curiosity that pulls you towards destruction, so to put it bluntly. So it's meant as an invitation for you both to kind of think about the position, this middle position of the object, and this strange push and pull.
Interesting. It reminded me of a film, I think it was made in the 90s, which was about a relationship and the love that the man had, which was maybe overpowered or oversized, and he didn't know what to do, and he decided to take her apart, and so take her in pieces, but she remained alive. But anyway, I don't remember exactly, but I remember that there were barely left at the end, even though, and when you talk about taking the object apart, or I know that a lot of people that are interested in cars or in electronics or understanding a stereo, they're so fascinated that they will take it apart. But in that taking apart is more understanding and learning how you could put it back eventually. It's learning about it. It's the process of understanding what that is made of. And so not so much the destruction, but what was it before it was not yet that, right? And that's I think that's a very important point in wanting to or the strength of your relationship to it is guided by wanting to know what was it before it wasn't and how it became.
Interesting. It's a very kind of it's a question which is very subtle and detailed inside inside your engagement with our work. So I'll try to be very brief in answering. But I think that one thing which is crucial. So in Freud, you do get this idea that one's love life is a history of substitutions. And so there becomes a sense in which one is always trying to get back to, through the new love, one is always trying to get back to some originary thing that one doesn't quite know what it is, but one desires. And the truth, I think, that is in that, I don't know if that's a correct theory of our development, but the truth in that is that I think love is a problematic state of being, in the sense that the question, what is it I love, or do I really love, or is this something other than love, is always a living question for the lover. Am I objectifying this person and projecting a fantasy onto them, or am I actually, as I would want to put it, am I actually loving them? Am I actually coming into a relationship with them? And love is just a site where we are uncertain how to answer that. We might be at the end, but I know that there is another question, Joanna?
If you'd be so willing to just take one more question that was in the queue from earlier, then I think we'll close. I've just sent a message in the chat, and so the next one in the queue was from Lisa Hall, and I think it was a really good question that we could maybe dip back into. And so Lisa, if you're still in the Zoom room, I'm just checking. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yes, this is maybe more of a practical question, maybe a simple question, maybe a question that can't actually be answered. I'm not sure, but thank you for a beautiful talk, by the way. Yeah, and I was really wanting, like, could you just say a bit more about like power and control? So what I wrote in the chat was, if I understand what you said correctly, like creating a performance or dance is very much about letting the object or the other body or whatever, the floor, have like 60% of the influence or the power, I think you said. And so the creation very much involves response. And I see dancers as almost like the most embodied and most embedded of the artistic form. So that might be my bias towards dancers. But I was just wondering how do you cultivate that ability, either in yourself or in the dancers that you teach, to attend to the other in order to listen and respond? Because it feels like so much in our daily lives teaches us not to be responsive in that way. And it also, I think, touches on what you said about empathy and that ability. And also, I just want to say quickly, I share your concern about how strong critique can be in the academic world. And I think it also kind of relates to this responsivity, this maybe empathy. But yeah, I just wondering, like, how do you practice that? How do you cultivate that ability to pay attention and respond rather than try and control?
Thank you for the question. I've lost you. We've lost you now and then because there were few interferences. But I think
sorry.
That's fine. I think I understood your questions. How do we practice that ability to relate and to be let's say moved by or informed by something external than our own body? I use mostly senses, like either touch, I have various practice that I've learned with other people through my career, and that have really helped me to develop ways in understanding how one can be more receptive, more and what does this mean? And maybe one thing that I can say is that there's and I've worked for more than 10 years with this martial art master, Akira Hino, Japanese martial art master. And he would say very, very often, which might be a funny things to say here, even though it's also the more or less the title of your book, of one. It says, take your head and throw it in the garbage when you enter the room. So of course, he's not saying don't think, don't, but what he was trying to tell us is that try to not recognize or understand what we are doing with the tools that you already have. So you need kind of to liberate yourself from that. And there are various ways of doing that. And that's maybe the hardest thing to achieve is how are you really listening to something and not constantly understanding or reflecting on what you're listening, which then distance you from enacting or from receiving something, right? So it's like juice or electricity. How can you not constantly stop the currents by going like, ah, yeah, that's what it is and that's what I think, but how can you allow the most constant and constant relationship of that thing coming to you, right? Or you know, there's one thing when also an exercise that I've learned a long time ago, which is deals with listening, and we always think that listening is pulling your ears towards something, right? And in this exercise, it's mostly allowing to release the ears and allow the sounds to come to you, right? Because that's what happens to sounds. So you don't have to go like where it sounds and kind of forcing upon your surrounding to discover things, but it's more a kind of a release, allowing things to happen. So, and that demands a lot of effort. It's very difficult. Doing as much or interacting or having ideas or responding is much easier. It's something that we are very well educated in doing, but being in a way receptive and allowing things to be without negotiating what is that is very difficult.
I'd like to say one very small thing in addition to that, which is there's a quote from Merleau-Ponty, which I love, and I mentioned it
Which
yesterday.
I love too.
I mentioned it in my talk, which now I'm going to not get it right, but it's something like, there's nothing harder than knowing what you see. Is that how I said it yesterday? There's nothing harder than knowing what you see, which is a really strange thing to say, but I think is a profound truth. And what it implies is that there's something of great value, I think, in trying to pay attention to what you see and cultivate that ability. And their see could be hear, could be touch. It's productive. It's productive in the sense of it's transformative to know what you see. And in a way, philosophy, at least phenomenology, is a practice dedicated to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Alva and Fabrice, do you have anything else you want to close with other than for us? We'd just like to extend an immense thank you to you both. This has been a really rich repast, and we have received your feast with much gusto. So rest assured.
That's very good.
Thank you.
I think we're satisfied too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we could continue and take a break and just continue, but that's going to happen anyway.
But I was unfinished before, and now I'm finished.
And now I'm unfinished.
Okay.
No, it's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, thank
And
you.
thanks to the larger community. It's good to become a part of this community.
Yes, and you're most welcome. And you're welcome to come back for another installment, the two of you, if you'd ever like. It would be really lovely. But thank
Okay.
you for this evening. And also I
We'll
want
see
to
whether
say,
there's public.
When we're 80.
yes. Also, thank you to our wonderful hosts, because we didn't mention this at the beginning, but the home of Scott Cohen. Thank you for setting up all of the filming for this evening, and also Jochen Schuff, your assistant. I really appreciate also his help in setting this up. So from all of us at Mind and Life Europe, a huge thanks. And I'm sure in some way this will continue. But for now, I think we just had a couple of last announcements for the evening before we all leave you to get a good night's sleep, hopefully. These are just our last 2 upcoming events or announcements really for the month of June before we take a break over the summer. And as many of you know, we have the European Summer Research Institute in Austria. Many of you will be there with us. Alva Noë will be there with us, and we'll be doing the 2nd installment of this very series live at the Esri. So you will see another iteration of this with another wonderful choreographer dancer, actually Jonathan Burrows, who was mentioned this evening. And so we invite you to stay tuned for news about that once we have that recorded. But for June, we're going to quiet down our programming and we'll just have one practice session, and then we'll be releasing one of our dialogue recordings from the Esri last year. So we'll be releasing that on our YouTube channel very soon. So with that, I think we can close there. And once again, thank you, Alva and Fabrice. This has been just delicious. So thank you. And take care, everyone, and have a good rest of the evening or good rest of your day.
Bye.